Hey, welcome to another episode of the Design Exchange podcast. Kind of. Today's a really short episode, just 10 minutes long. It's an interview with my friend Charlie Moritz, who has a YouTube channel about coffee, and more specifically, how to make coffee at home. And I called him up to ask him some questions related to a coffee film or vlog that I'm making. So be sure to check out the vlog kind of film that this interview is a part of. Link to that below, as well as Charlie's YouTube channel, Home Cafe by Charlie, also linked in the description below. Hey Charlie, what's up?
Hey, good to see you, Thomas. How you doing?
For those who don't know, my friend Charlie runs a coffee-centric YouTube channel, Home Cafe by Charlie.
That's right.
So link in description, be sure to check that out. Charlie, I need your help today. There's a cafe I love. It's a third wave cafe. So they're doing their own roasting and they have latte art. And I think it's delicious. The location that's close to where I live closed down. And now I've had to try to find their main location, their original location, which is quite a bit farther away. In a kind of stopgap effort to fill this hole in my life, I've gone to Starbucks and tried their lattes, and I've not been satisfied by it.
Yeah.
Why is this? Why are Starbucks lattes different than the lattes you find at third wave cafes?
Right. So it's probably a bunch of different things. Part of it might just be what you're used to. And, if you're used to a certain flavor, then changing to another cafe is going to be different anyway. But with Starbucks in particular, a big part of the problem is the scale at which they're doing coffee. So Starbucks has hundreds and hundreds of stores all over Japan, so they need a lot of coffee, and it's really hard to get consistent coffee when you have hundreds of stores. Whereas a specialty shop, they can get enough coffee to have the same coffee all year round from one farm. So that's a big part of it. So what Starbucks does to deal with this problem is that they get a lot of coffee from lots of different farms all over the coffee belt. So they might get a lot of coffee from Brazil and Colombia, places where they grow a lot of coffee. And then what they do is to hide the fact that they had different coffees, because they want to have a consistent product, right? So to hide the fact that they're using different coffees all the time, they roast them really, really dark, which gets rid of a lot of the sort of unique and interesting different flavors from different farms. Now, I know a lot of people who do prefer a dark roast. They like a really rich, strong flavor, but you're just going to get basic coffee flavor. So if you're ordering a latte from Starbucks, it's just going to taste like kind of vague coffee flavor, whereas the specialty cafe that you were used to is probably using a different kind of coffee bean, something that's really interesting that they've roasted to a certain level to make sure that they pick out all of the interesting flavors of that coffee bean. So that's another big part of it. The final part of it that I'll talk about is the barista. So in Starbucks, recently they've changed their machines. They're all using their own in-house machines, which actually, the barista doesn't really do anything. They press a button, and of course they have, the manager will dial in the coffee grind to make the right kind of grind setting. But the barista themselves doesn't really make the coffee. They just press a button. They're basically waiters and waitresses of coffee. So it's a really different thing when you actually have a barista who's dialing in the coffee every time, like at the specialty cafe. They have someone who's checking, and they're checking the humidity in the air. They're checking the age of the coffee every day, and they're adjusting the grind to get the best out of that coffee bean. And they're probably not doing that at Starbucks.
I have to wonder if it's something more than that when it comes specifically to lattes, because for myself personally, when it comes to drip coffee, I'm pretty good with anything. I can have whatever from the convenience store, any brand, basically.
I see your Family Mart coffee right there.
Any of these drip coffees seem to be okay to me. When I spend a little bit extra and get the drip bags from some of my favorite cafes, there's more variety in the taste. So I'll get one might be more sour, more bitter, etc. But I'm not getting the same difference of experience as I get when I'm dealing specifically with lattes. The word that I've used the very first time I had a Gibraltar from Blue Bottle, the sensation that came to me was that I was drinking molten coffee. And I suspect that it has something to do with the oils of the coffee beans and the oil of the milk kind of coming together and forming something else that's more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
When I'm drinking a coffee, or even if I'm drinking one of these nice lattes, but it's been some amount of time, like I let it get cold and sit around for a while, the taste changes a lot, and it starts to become a lot more like a Starbucks, where it's like coffee flavored milk as opposed to molten coffee.
Right. So I think part of what you're talking about is the texture, and that thickness, the kind of interesting kind of velvety texture that you get from a freshly brewed coffee. You're not going to get that with a drip bag or with a lot of different other kinds of brewing. So the reason why espresso has that is because it's brewed under pressure. So a normal coffee machine will use 8 or 9 bars of atmospheric pressure to kind of extract that coffee, but it pulls a lot of the oils out of the bean as well, and that creates it also creates CO2, which is kind of locked in the bean from the roasting process, and that comes out in the form of something called crema, which is that thick layer of, it almost looks like foam on top of the espresso when it's just been pulled. Now, if you use a drip bag, that coffee has been ground up and a lot of the air has basically gone out of the grinds. So you don't have any more CO2 coming out. So when you do brew it, you're not going to get those bubbles, that texture, that thickness that comes from a freshly brewed espresso using beans that are close to their roast date. At home, I have an espresso machine and I'll use coffee that's between 1 week and 4 weeks off the roast date. Having fresh coffee is really, really important, and also grinding it fresh. If you grind the coffee into smaller particles, then it's going to lose that CO2 very quickly, and that's going to take a lot of the aromas and the texture with it.
Okay, one last question for you. How far, in terms of minutes, let's say, how far is a reasonable amount of time to travel for a good latte?
You don't want to ask me this question, Thomas. Like,
what's the right
really
amount of
far
time?
for a good
Like,
latte.
at what point would you have been better off going to Starbucks?
I don't think there's a point where I'd be better off going to Starbucks or Family Mart or something. Part of that is also I have an espresso machine at home, so my home espresso is better than most cafes that I would go to that aren't sort of like high-end specialty cafes. But if you're asking me how far you travel for a good coffee, I mean, I went all the way to this backwater neighborhood in Osaka to get this spoonful of coffee that costs 1,500 yen, they're like $15, just because I was really excited to try this specific coffee. It was like, it was aged in barrels and stuff. So for me, there are very few distances I wouldn't travel for a coffee. But for the average person, I would say try brewing some coffee at home. Get a really basic setup. My favorite one for beginners is an AeroPress, because AeroPress can work with just about anything. And if you go for AeroPress, then you can get some coffee, like whether it's ground or whole beans. Usually I would recommend whole beans and then grinding it yourself fresh. And then using an AeroPress, you're going to get amazing coffee. You'll beat most cafes, you'll beat all of the convenience stores, and you'll get really good coffee at home. And it doesn't cost all that much. I think an AeroPress is about $30 US, and a grinder might be $30 US as well for a basic one. And that's already going to beat whatever you can get at a convenience store and a lot of, sort of lower end cafes as well.
How do AeroPresses compare to, do you know those kind of stainless steel or aluminum kind of machined looking? They're like AeroPresses, but large and made out of metal.
Yeah.
You know those things?
I have something similar to that. Hold on. Let me just grab it. Are you talking about something like this?
Yeah, exactly. Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly
so
that.
This is kind of like a manual espresso maker. So it's actually making espresso. So it's a very different process from something like an AeroPress. So the thing with these, they are a lot more expensive, and you do have to learn a lot more about how to dial in an espresso, about how to grind it properly. So for this one, I use a more expensive grinder. So one that can grind to a very fine level to make a really good espresso. It's a great option for people who are really getting into it, but for most people, I think doing something like that, like a manual espresso, it just takes too much learning, too much time in the morning. You need to really prep it. Whereas an AeroPress, you can just boil the kettle and make it like you would, your normal cup of coffee.
Well, I'm going to have to definitely run some tests at home and see, if I can, if I'm preferring the convenience store coffee, the convenience store home drip coffees, the boutique drip coffees, or grinding it fresh and using either a AeroPress or a Chemix or something to do that. I don't have a grinder, so that's kind of the main thing I'd need to start with.
I would say that's the biggest step for most people. I would say if you get your own coffee grinder, and then when you buy your coffee beans, get them fresh and get them from somewhere as whole beans, not as pre-ground, and then grind them yourself, you're going to see the biggest improvement in your home coffee experience ever.
Thanks for your time and expertise, Charlie. I appreciate
you're welcome.
it. And guess we'll talk to you later. If you'd like to learn more about Charlie's coffee expertise and his various reviews of techniques and machines that you can use to make coffee at home, check out Home Cafe by Charlie. Link in the description.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Bye, Charlie.
See ya.